now take a motion to defer the cycling strategy and pathway safety. I'm kidding. All right, that takes us to, finally, 11.2.1, LPT 2011-63, the cycling strategy and pathway safety review. Can I have someone move it and get it on the floor? Yeah, okay. So Alderman Farrell, seconded Alderman Pincott. Okay, so we've got it on the floor. Do you want us to get us started, Alderman Farrell? Since you moved it.
Yes, I think I can hopefully address any questions in my closing, but I know it's generated a lot of controversy in the media and amongst different groups in the last week, but I have to say that that public hearing was one of the most positive that I've ever experienced at Land Use Planning and Transportation Committee. And we had a number of different groups and citizens who like to ride their bikes come and speak, and without exception speak about the need for better cycling amenities, the need to feel safe, and the need to have better access and connectivity was universal. And that's what we heard. The plan isn't perfect, or the strategy isn't perfect. It's a first step. I think it's a big step forward, and the hard work will come in the implementation of the strategy, where we will be consulting with the many different cycling groups and cyclists, average Calgarians, non-cyclists who are interested in cycling, in what the strategy should look like. But I don't think we're any different than any other winter city in North America. People are cycling, and they're cycling in the strangest weather, and I give them a lot of credit. So I'll answer any questions in my closing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alderman Farrell. I have a number of questions for administration. So with Council's forbearance, maybe I can ask some of those now, as they may help a little bit with the rest of the debate. So, Mr. Logan, and I think you've got some staff with you as well. So I'm very, very broadly supportive of the direction in here, but as always, the devil's in the details. And for me, the devil's in the details a little bit on the numbers. And so when I see that we look at hiring 3 new staff overall, first of all, I think it would be interesting for the public to hear, how does that compare to the amount of planning staff that we have working on other modes of transportation? You know, how many planning staff do we have in transit, for example, or in roads?
Your Worship, members of Council, my name is Don Mulligan, Director of Transportation Planning here with the City of Council. I can certainly speak for transportation planning itself. We have a staff of 80. In terms of how many are working on, we don't work specifically on transit. We cover primarily walking, cycling, roads, and goods movement.
Okay.
And much of the work that we do is it's not clearly in one bucket or another. Of those 80 staff, I would suggest about 40 of them are working on walking, cycling, emphasis on auto, for sure. Goods movement as well. In terms of transit, I'm not sure of the specific numbers, but it's in the order of, I'd say, 10, 12 perhaps.
Okay. And how many folks do you have specifically working on cycling at the moment?
Well, we don't have any dedicated staff working on cycling, and that's part of what this report is all about.
So it's 0 to 3?
Well, I wouldn't say it's 0. We have portions of a couple of positions. I would say the equivalent of two or 3 FTEs, two and a half are working part of the time on cycling related work.
And if you cobbled together, I know this is an unfair question, but if you cobbled together kind of the hours that they're working on it, would you end up with 1 full-time person, do you think, or?
No, I would suggest we're just above 2.
Oh, I see. Sorry, I misunderstood. If you cobble together the hours that everyone is working on it, you end up with 2.5 FTE. Yeah, sorry, you said that. I just misunderstood. The other question, Mr. Mulligan, is if we hire 3 sort of base budget permanent resources working on this, I noticed there was nonetheless quite a bit of money in the operational plan going towards what I'm reading is external consultants. And if I'm reading it correctly, it's about $500,000 to create the actual implementation plan and the detailed pathway map for the whole city and so on. And then another, I think 200,000-ish, 230,000 for design guidelines. Could you just talk a little bit about why the additional 600-ish thousand is required when we now have full-time staff working on this?
Absolutely. Your Worship, the consulting money is a one-time amount, and the amount is for what we call a comprehensive pathway and bikeway plan for the entire city. And we did a similar project back in 2001, and it took 2.5 years. It involved 60 stakeholder groups, and we anticipate that it'll be even bigger, given the city is bigger, and that there's significantly more interest from stakeholders in cycling today than there was 10 years ago. And so we see it as a very large, comprehensive engagement process. And the other thing is technologies and the options that are available in terms of cycling have changed a lot in the last 10 years, and there's a lot more options available to us. And so that is in large part why we have that amount for the engagement, or sorry, for the consultant.
I guess I can get my head around the piece on developing the plan. The design guidelines piece, though, is confusing to me because my understanding is that cities around the world have been working on this, and sort of there is a professional organization that kind of has done design guidelines already. Is it really going to take $250,000 to adapt that to the Calgary context?
Well, we think that there is a significant amount of effort required because each city is unique. There are rapidly evolving design concepts, and they're not just concepts. The actual detailed design work is required from city to city, and this is something we would not necessarily do on our own. We would work with other cities, perhaps, and we would work with Transportation Association of Canada, commonly known as TAC, and also some of the same efforts that have been done in the United States, where they've developed. We met Mia Burke the other day. She's been involved in creating new guidelines beyond the standards that exist today. So there's a fair bit of work there to get from where we are today to where we want to go.
Only 2 more, I promise.
Okay.
On capital budget, I have to tell you, the thing that caused me to gasp more than anything else in this report was when I saw $25,000 per kilometer for a painted bike lane and $100,000 per kilometer for a grade-separated bike lane. Wow, those sound like really big numbers. I may have said, is the paint made of gold and baby seals? But could you tell me a little bit more about where those numbers came from?
Well, those numbers did come from our colleagues in roads, and they're the ones that have put these down. They've done some of this work already, albeit not enough of it. But it does involve sometimes grinding out an existing line because we have to move one. It involves these lines are not cheap if we want them to last, and we're hearing from cyclists that they want them to last. It involves signage, and in some cases it involves signals. And signal head changes, and where we want to go is, in some cases, signal heads for bikes. So all of those things contribute to that amount, not just the paint as such.
Mr. Mulligan, do you think that savings would be possible? You know, I'm just thinking back to when Maya Burke was here, and she said that she showed up on a Saturday afternoon when a roads crew was doing a road, and they developed a design guideline on the back of a napkin and said, just do this. And the thing that I get out of that is, would we see cost savings if, I guess, a 2-part question. One, how often do we repaint the lines anyway? And would we see cost savings if we just made this part of the road department's regular work if they're repainting lines on a street that we want a bike lane on? They just do it all at once.
Well, I'm not an expert in how often they repaint the lines. I know it depends on what type of lines they put down. It also depends where it is. The bike stencils and the bike line markings tend to be, they are in the shoulder where there's significant gravel and where there's quite a bit of wear and tear just because of the gravel on those line paints, on the lines themselves. So, but it does depend on the type of material that they put down, and there's some, I know there's some experimentation because some of it needs to be environmentally friendly, et cetera. So there is some experimentation going on. The second part, the second question, I can't.
I think you got them both.
Okay.
Mr. Logan, did you want to jump in? You look like you wanted to jump
Your
in.
Worship, just on the line painting, it was an issue that came up repeatedly in the public portion of the LPT hearing, and we would need to paint a lot of those markings on an annual basis. The intent is to try to find a lane delineation that doesn't require annual painting, and it's self-evident either through a different surface, a different color of asphalt, or something like that. So, when you talk about painting a bike lane, I think that's one of the reasons why it's so
That's helpful.
expensive.
So, in fact, what you might be doing, it might be a very high capital cost, but a very low operating cost if, in fact, you put down purple asphalt in a lane, right? Mm-hmm. Did I mention that I have a bias on the color of the bike lanes? Sorry. You mean I made it have all kinds of positive implications for you. One last one. Bike share.
Yes.
I know that other cities have done it. I've experienced it in other cities. Do you have a sense of what the experience has been? Because my sense from the political side is that financially other cities have found this a challenging program, and it's hard for me to understand what the benefits are other than it's really cool.
The experience in other cities, we certainly have checked out in terms of numbers, and we conservatively estimate that it will. I think we're planning 400 stations, 500 bikes, 40 stations, which is a tenth of what Montreal has introduced at this point. We think that will result in 100,000 bike trips in the first year. And the information we receive is that this does change the trip making for a significant number of people that would not have taken bike just because they don't have to buy a bike, they don't have to store a bike, they don't have to lock a bike. They can use it in one direction. And it's so people that would never think of biking use the bike share program because it's convenient. It costs less than $100 per year to subscribe. It's very easy to use in that it's electronic payment. We can track the use, and so it's very easy to keep track of the users. So that's some of the experience that we've learned about from other cities.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Milligan. That is it for me, but I have a full tableau of lights, so we'll start with Alderman Lowe.
Your Worship, I'll make it very simple. You won't be surprised that I will refer this at some point, because there are. No, I'm not going to now, because I know some of my colleagues have amendments they want to put to it that I think could be constructive. But at some point, this must go to the dreaded BCBP or BPBC 03 process, because there are some very hard choices in here.
I agree with you.
Operating and capital
I
perspective.
agree with you, Alderman Lowe, but let's engage on this one for a sec before you finish that thought, which is the way that I know Alderman McLeod has a motion, has an amendment to make it even a little more clear, but the way that I read the recommendations are, in fact, that we send this report on to the BPBC for funding, but that we start with the principles in the report. At least that's my reading of the recommendations. I didn't like the way it said include the capital costs in the tip and the CRIP. I don't think that was the intent of the motion. I think the intent was to consider them for the trip and the CRIP.
And I appreciate that. The difficulty I had was the way it was constructed, was that if recommendation number 1 failed, we were at it. And so it's just far cleaner to let the amendments go through than refer the whole thing here and then deal with it. And, quite frankly, the capital, I think, has to go into the TIPS program because there is a significant, and there is an operating implication here, which I think is also significant given the constraints that we're going up against. So it's, I'm not disputing the need or the desire to have the program, but I'm suggesting that it becomes one of those choices that council will have to make in November. So at the appropriate time, Your Worship, if you'd recognize me, and it'll be my intention just to preempt number one, if you will, and refer the whole thing.
Will do. So I'll recognize. Don't let me forget. I'll recognize you before we get to the close. Okay. Alderman McLeod.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to follow that because I'm not sure I'm understanding. It seems to me that we have these strategies here that have been agreed on by many people as being the right way to go, and that we have a municipal development plan and a transportation plan that supports cycling as a priority. How is it, like, is it not, what's my question? Can we approve this in principle and leave the funding aside? I mean, that part actually does confuse me. I realize this needs to be funded, and I also realize that this forms part of the next budget, but I'm not sure it needs to be referred. I think that's a separate discussion for the budget.
My preference would be, if it were me, my preference would be to get the language in 1 and 1A and 4 correct, rather than to refer it. Because I think it is important for council to make a statement of principles that goes beyond the MDP if council is willing to do so.
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, to me that makes more sense. Yeah. Because the MDP, I think, is not clear enough. It says, yeah, we like bikes, but this takes us to the next level if we pass it today of directional statements. And like I say, personally, I don't agree with every single thing in here, but I think the direction really, I mean, I would say, Mr. Logan, and I'm looking at you for this, that if council were to pass these principles today, that gives you pretty clear direction as you're working through your budgets that you've got to prioritize this stuff. And if council just referred it, I'm not sure you'd have that direction. Is that fair?
Your Worship, I would say just going back and looking at the cycling strategy document, there's nothing in here that really obligates council, I believe, to make a budget decision of a set amount. So I think that this document certainly could be approved. It sends a clear message. It elevates the priority, if you will, for this council for the budget cycle. That was what I took away from council's plan for Calgary last week. And maybe our wording is incorrect, Your Worship. What we were trying to say to council was that we're not asking council to make a budget decision in advance of the budget discussions. We want to all those decisions to be on the table at the same time.
No, I thank you. I appreciate that, and I think that was the intent. But I want to make sure the language is clear there, because I remember some years ago, Alderman Collier-Cart had a run-in with a particularly irritating member of the public out here in the atrium. And the context of our discussion, I mean her discussion with that member of the public, was just on this very note, is when council makes decisions like this, do we bind our hands when it comes to budget time? And I think administration has been extremely disciplined over the last several weeks in ensuring that we're referring the real questions about money into the budget. And I want to make sure we're doing that today. Sorry, Alderman McLeod, you still got the floor.
Thank you. That was very helpful because that is part of what the amendments I want to put forward here. But I wanted clarity because I think it's important that we make a statement on how this is a priority for the city. So to the amendments on 1A and on 4, after include in the capital costs, adding for council's consideration. I think we'll have them up here in a second. So that actually just clarifies that this doesn't supersede the business planning and budget process.
Yeah, because it does say just above, refer the costs to the business plan and budget process. It even uses the word refer, Alderman Lowe. Yeah, I like that. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the second part of my amendments is to change B to read, direct administration to prepare a business case study on bike share, including revenue, benefits, and experience in other cities to report to SPC and Land Use Planning and Transportation no later than 2011 December. Part of the reason I'm putting that forward is because the existing B talks about the bike share being completely contingent on securing funds from private partners. And in order to do that, you need some framework, a business case to work from. You have to make the case. And so I think this is going to be useful. And I think I would also, as part of a business case, we need to look at the financial as well as the non-financial benefits, that there has to be both parts in that. So that's why the benefits are in there. So it's revenue, benefits, revenue, comma, costs, benefits, and experience in other cities, so that we see all of that in an effort to make the strongest possible case we can on the bike share.
Okay.
And that would be my intent on that.
And let me just ask a question to administration on that, if you don't mind, Alderman McLeod, because I thought I saw some eyebrows go up when the date was given. Mr. Logan, too aggressive?
No, Your Worship, confirmed that we've actually already started that work.
Okay. All right. And okay, great. So do I have a seconder for that set of amendments? And I will call them separately. Thanks, Alderman Footmans. Sorry? It's 2011 December. End of the year.
I just want to clarify that that change in 1A also applies to 4.
The exact to the language in recommendation number 4. Okay, so that is moved and seconded. On the amendment, anyone? No, Alderman yeah, just wave at me because all the lights are on anyway. Alderman Keating.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to talk specifically to the replacement of B. Now, there is nothing wrong with the new B because it states you have to have a business case. Totally acceptable. The original B was an amendment placed at council at committee that stated if you're going to do the bike share, you must find private partners to do it. This says skip the private partners, do a business case, and implement the strategy. So in other words, I find it completely contrary that you're getting rid of an amendment that was put in and passed because it specifically says, and going back to the idea of what we're doing is there have been many municipalities that have put in a bike share and have lost an awful lot of money. And this one says we can't afford to do that in this budget time. And therefore, I have no problem with endorsing B, the second or the new B, as part of the original B.
Okay.
But I think the original B has to stay there because it says
right.
We won't fund it.
If I can be telepathic for a moment with Alderman McLeod, I think that the intent was actually even to take a step back from the recommendation there, to say go back, period. But the intent was never to exclude the private partners from the discussion. So maybe we should have been more clear in the language. So we can do an amendment.
And maybe I should have been more clear on the original that says excluding city funds.
Yeah.
That was the intent.
Yeah, and my sense is that my own personal sense is I would have liked to have seen the business case for both private funds and whether there is a reason to invest public funds in it. You know, I don't want to cut off that avenue until we know. And because you did say it says and implement, and that doesn't not there at all. The whole point is come back and tell us why we should do this and where the money might come from. I mean, that's the goal. But I would like to make sure that when we do that, when we look at the revenue, we make sure we look at all the revenue sources. And so we could easily add, and you could make an amendment now if you wanted, something like this study should include an analysis of securing funds from private partners.
I'm not sure that goes back to the original B, which says the city should not be funding a bike share program. It should be C.
Well, I mean, interestingly, Alderman Keating, the original B didn't actually say securing all the funds from private partners. And so,
And I did have a question when I read that, because I'm looking at it here and it says city funding the proposed bike with partners. And again, I'm not sure if that was my original intention. If that's the original wording, so be it, but it goes against what the original amendment was at committee.
so
was
just
to
to
say.
make our procedural life a little bit easier, let's vote on this one,
Yep.
and then I'll recognize you to add the language from original B back in as a B.
With slightly changing, so that makes it perfectly clear.
If you like, though, my advice to you might be that might be harder to pass.
So be it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alderman Keating. Don't let me forget to recognize you after we vote on this one. Alderman Demong.
I was actually going to make an amendment to the amendment and make it B and C.
The only problem with that is just it's a very technical problem because this amendment says to remove B and replace it with another B. I don't think you can go back and do that, can you, Madam Clerk? Yeah, we'd have to vote on it first. It's just because of the language of the amendment. Because the amendment is to replace that with the other. Hang on, the clerk is conferring. Mr. Tully is thinking. Everyone is thinking. Because maybe we could do an amendment and add a new B and turn that one into C, amendment to amendment. What do you think, Mr. Tully? Yeah.
I think you have, actually, so I think you need to vote on it.
Okay, so I think you're right. I think we need to vote on it first. Okay. Anyone else on this amendment? Alderman Chabot.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, personally, I see this as complementary to what was previously put on and should have probably been accepted as a newbie. Not to say that it comes from a newbie, but it's a new amendment. In my opinion, it actually adds value to the original motion that was put in council or at committee that would then further qualify that by saying, okay, now on the basis of the following pro forma, that it be contingent on receiving private funding from private partners. So it would have been more appropriately put, in my opinion, if it would have been put forward as a new B and changed the current B into C. So if it can't be accepted that way, I'm not sure what the mechanism is to go back to have that former B reintroduced.
Easy. We'll just vote on this one. If this passes, then I will recognize Alderman Keating, and Alderman Keating will move to add the original language back as B.
Okay. And that wouldn't be contrary?
No. No, I don't think so.
Exactly. I would have to agree with my colleague here.
Madam Clerk?
That if this is removed and it's reintroduced, then it would require reconsideration.
You were the same. And then I understood it was to be a slightly different.
If it's slightly different, then it's okay.
And how would it be slightly different?
We'll let Alderman Keating figure that part out.
Because I thought he was going to say all of the funding.
Yeah, I thought he was too.
That's right. That's what I thought.
Or alternatively, just vote it down.
Okay, I'll just sit down and
Your Worship, what I am prepared to do is clarify B so that it actually includes the spirit of what is in C here, but perhaps not what Alderman Keating was talking about where it's exclusive. So when I referred to revenue, I added revenue specifically because I wanted it to include city revenue, perhaps city revenue, but alternative sources of revenue. So we can actually clarify revenue, and in terms of benefit, I want it specifically to reflect the financial and non-financial, because it's the non-financial benefits that will justify if, in fact, any city revenue is justifiable.
Let's make life easier for ourselves. Let's make a motion to withdraw this amendment. Okay, if you and the seconder both agree, and it's unanimous by council, and then we'll let you put the slightly modified amendment right away, because there's no mechanism for you to amend your own amendment.
Okay.
Okay? So motion to withdraw this amendment then, moved by Alderman McLeod, seconded by Alderman Pootmans. Are we agreed? Any opposed? Okay. Alderman McLeod.
Yikes. Okay. So.
Or we can go to someone else and you can come back to this one if you want.
I think we should actually, because I want to get the
You want to get
wording
the language
right on
exactly
both.
right?
Because this is
So let's
gonna be-
continue. We still got lots of lights on. Let's continue our discussion and I'll come back to you. And maybe Alderman Keating, you might want to caucus with Alderman McLeod and see if you can get it right, okay? Alderman Pootmans, do you want to take your time now?
It's just,
Yeah, for the main motion.
yes, thank you. On the main motion, thank you, Your Worship. To administration, curious as to why this was, the capital program was capital cost over a 3-year total. Was there any particular operational reason for this? Was this a business planning matter? Why 3 years?
In terms of, through your worship, I'm not sure I understand the question.
The capital cost 3-year total. So in other words, I think you imagine a 3-year program to roll out the cycling strategy?
So you're saying why 3, not 2 or 5? Or?
Precisely.
Well, we're just trying to be in sync with the 3-year business planning cycle and 2012 to 14, and we've identified some one-time costs, and then the rest of the costs are annual costs for that 3-year time frame. The focus of the plan is to implement. That's what we were told by council, and so we're trying to keep it a manageable 3-year time frame to implement the details of the plan.
Fair enough. Outside of the business planning and cycle issues, are there other let's say, for instance, for a variety of reasons, we might want to implement this program and this strategy over a 4-year period. Would there be implications into the rollout or your business planning, and how far evolved is the planning that 4 years might be a really serious impediment to you? Or at this point, if we were to say, let's do this, but perhaps maybe for financial reasons, it might make sense for council to consider it over a 4-year period, might have more public acceptance. And I'm wondering what the implications from a rollout point of view, operational point of view, practicality point of view, there might be attached to that.
Okay. Well, there is a link between the capital investment in Center City and the bike share program. We would like to see significant improvements in bike lanes downtown. Now, the capital investment is not all downtown. Roughly a third is downtown, a third is transit related, and a third is in activity centers. So there really is only a link time-wise for part of the downtown capital projects, and that's because it's linked to the bike share initiative.
So in terms of a proper, efficient, and effective rollout of the cycling strategy and the operational requirements of that strategy, you would be able to manage with a 4-year budget or a 4-year program as opposed to a 3-year program.
Well, we would do less. It would just take longer. Yeah, we could certainly stretch it out if that was what council deemed appropriate. We'd prefer to see it as is, but other than the bike share, there wouldn't be anything jeopardized by going to 4 years for part of the capital.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mulligan. Your Worship, I will be presenting a motion to consider the program over 4 years. So if I could be recognized.
Do you want to do it now?
I hadn't had a chance to scratch it out, so let me write it out.
I'll come back to you, though.
I needed to understand this before I.
I strongly suspect one of your other colleagues whose light is on may be making a similar motion, but we'll see how we go.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Carra.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I want to echo Alderman Farrell's comments about it being a very good committee meeting with a lot of really positive impact or input from the cycling community, the diverse but obviously committed cycle community. I've thought a lot about where we're going with this, and I'm increasingly convinced that we really need to separate lanes, and we need to separate lanes in a rollout that puts it on the ground, and so it's not incremental, so it works. And gravel is a killer for bikes, and I don't know the cheapest way we could possibly separate lanes. Like, I've got this fantasy that we could go out to all the parking lots in suburbia and steal the just the concrete piers and just like drop them along the roadway, pound them in and say, and we're done or something. But just, I really
Please note for the people in the gallery, he is not actually recommending this course of action.
So I guess my question is, Appendix A, this map here, how beholden does the approval of this strategy make us to the map in Appendix A? Because I'm not convinced that this is the rollout of the comprehensive separated bike lane system in the downtown that's going to have enough critical mass to go far enough and to really implement or really to get people cycling more. And so I guess my question is, how beholden to this strategy does an acceptance here, or am I going to have to make an amendment that asks us to look at that?
Through your worship, the plan in that map is intended mostly for on-street bike lanes, which are not physically separated. It is something that we want to explore and do pilot projects on, but the plan is to proceed somewhat cautiously because of our unique situation in Calgary. And
Unique how?
pardon me?
Unique how?
A very intense downtown core with 130,000 jobs and 30,000 people. We have very narrow lanes in a lot of cases, a lot of activity. Those are some of the unique things, and there's some more typical things of a downtown core. But we have a lot of stakeholders that we need to engage, and we don't have any bike lanes except for 11th Street West and 9th Avenue East. That's it. That's the only dedicated room in all of downtown for cyclists today. And the intent is to dramatically improve on that in downtown. So putting dedicated bike lanes in the sequence, in the locations on that map is the plan going forward.
See, I think that unless we separate it right off the bat and we put in a robust enough network off the bat, it's not going to have the uptake, and it's not going to, I just don't think it's bold enough. So am I going to, I mean, I understand, I understand the work that you guys are doing and your attempts to roll it out, and I understand that the organization we're living in here, but I really think that if we are going to put it on the ground, we have to put it comprehensively on the ground. There has to be sufficient uptake. And I mean, if that means we get Jan Gell with it and do it as a temporary, is there some way to separate bike lanes? I mean, that to me is really what's critical. I mean, maybe I'll even ask Mac that question. How do we get bold?
Your Worship, I think that there are a couple examples in the document that illustrate how that can be accomplished. Page 41 in the color report has an excellent example of a two-way bike lane that's adjacent to a one-way downtown street, which is typical Calgary, where it has a fairly shallow curb that runs down the road. It's a very clear delineation, creates a barrier to some degree from the adjacent motorists. This particular example has streetlights on it. Other examples have landscaping, may not be that durable in this climate, certainly year to year. But that would be an example of what I would think we would need to do to physically separate the lanes. Vancouver's done that in a lot of cases as well. New York has done it differently. I think they've introduced a parking lane and then the bike lane. There's different ways of doing it.
I think New York's a different beast, though, because I think you have such a pedestrian culture in New York that they just spill out into the bike lanes, too. I mean, seriously, most of the cyclists I know in New York, cycle the roads because the bike lanes are full of pedestrians because there's just so many people on the street. We don't have that problem here, so we've got a different tipping point that we have to strike towards.
Page 66 is another good example. Same. Is that Vancouver? I think that's Vancouver. No, they don't have BC plates on the front, so that's not Vancouver. I don't think that that would be appropriate for all of the locations in Appendix A, certainly, but for the primary ones, I would say that would be a treatment we would look at.
But again, I think, like, what I need, I look at, can you tell me how Appendix A was sort of generated? Because I understand we've got some penetrators coming in from the north, but to me, I think it's about sort of creating like a full box or something. That's
The routes on Appendix A are a function of the Center City Plan and the Center City Mobility Plan and the land uses downtown and in Center City, the Beltline, in terms of where the residential is, where the 4th, 5th, and 6th and 9th are primarily auto roads that connect to the bridges that get people in and out of downtown. Many of those routes are north-south, and there's a need expressed by cyclists to get to their office tower from the pathway system, and there's a shortage of good routes to do that. That was part of the considerations. There's a lot of different things that were factored in. Certain roads are for transit, i.e. 7th Avenue. All of that is built into the Center City Plan, and then there's a Center City Mobility Plan. And so these things have been developed over a long period of time and based on a lot of different criteria, but those are some of the criteria that were included.
And this is coming out of the Center City Plan, so this is
Absolutely.
a fairly old document.
No.
Well, it's not that. It's not
3
like.
years old. I believe it's 3 or 4 years old.
What was the engagement with the cycling community on generating this document, this map?
Yeah, it goes back to the Center City Plan and the Center City Mobility Plan. So the engagement that would be there. Now, I'd like to point out as well, each of these projects will be individual projects, and there will be engagement involved in each plan when the detail is done. We need to talk to the people who do deliveries downtown, the businesses, and the cyclists, and the pedestrians as part of more detailed engagement for each of these individual projects.
Yeah, see, the thing that concerns me, though, is that if we're sort of pitting bike lanes against parking, we've got a problem. But if we can scrape out some bike lanes that people can either drive next to during the rush hours or park next to during the off-peak hours, then we don't have the same, fundamental issue. I don't see an east-west connection here on the road that just seems to me to be fundamental. Like you do.
There are east-west connections on 10th Avenue, parts of 9th Avenue.
Sorry, can I just jump in? As we're talking about maps and things, there's so many people in the gallery, it'd be helpful to put them on the document cam so that folks know exactly what we're talking about. Yes?
I'm not covered at SVC.
I don't know, I wasn't there.
Yeah,
It was.
Respectfully, it was, and you know what? I've honestly been sort of like sleeping uneasily about this, and I need to get a better sense of whether I have to make an amendment or whether we move forward. What I don't understand is that council's approval of that plan, does it lock us into that, or do we get?
That's a simple question. But to redo the whole 4 or 5 hour debate, Your Worship, 5 minutes or 20 minutes
Fair enough.
to 5.
Alderman Lowe, that's fair
No,
enough.
but your question is a really important one, Alderman Caron. I'm going to turn to Mr. Tobert on this one, which is, in your perception, council approves this plan. Does that lock us into this network? Or, how does, in your world, in your understanding, how does that really take us forward?
Your Worship, it outlines the intentions of council for the design of the transportation system. However, actual construction and implementation is subject to the budget. And, of course, a motion arising or notice of motion can be done at any time asking for an update to this report. We don't have to get it 100% perfect today. If there's something that really grieves you, though, and it needs a rethink, then doing it now on the floor isn't the place to do that. You really should refer it back.
I see, and I'm loath to do that too because we don't want to send that kind of message. I want to refer. Can I refer Appendix A back?
Of course you can.
Maybe that's what I will do.
I'm not sure that I would refer it back.
Okay.
So much as do a motion arising at the end, as long as we haven't referred it. If we've referred it, then you can't do a motion arising, I don't think. But what I would do is do a motion arising at the end, saying that Appendix A should go back for the purpose of
Okay.
further
I will work on
consultation,
that
better
now.
connectivity, that's whatever your point is.
One last question. I said the Center City plan was old and everyone sort of shook their head and grumbled. What predates what, the MDP or the Center City plan?
I believe it was Center City Plan, MDP, CTP.
Yeah.
By a
So,
year, yeah.
I mean, our triangle in terms of a, thank you. I agree. And I will work on my motion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alderman Carra. Alderman Pincott.
Well, thank you. I got to say, this is really frustrating. We've talked about a lot of this stuff, and based on somebody not sleeping, we suddenly have, let's throw the whole strategy out and start over again, for God's sake. We have a strategy that was worked on by administration with the cycling groups. It, I believe, is a realistic start. I've described this as a start. We have a 3-year window that it says, if we're going to start implementing a comprehensive strategy, this is where you start, and this is how you do it. We have a concern about budget, how to stretch it out to 4 years. So instead of $4 million a year, it's $3 million a year. So we have a concern about budget, and that's for predominantly painted lines. I fundamentally agree that, yes, separating out is appropriate, but it isn't appropriate everywhere. We have a strategy that identifies how you go about evaluating the different places and how you put it in different places for on-street, how you look at separated out pathways, how you look at integrating it into transit, how you look at the street furniture that you have to have, how you incent building owners to include lockups and shower facilities. That's a comprehensive strategy. It ain't going to get done in 3 years. We aren't going to come back in 2015 and say, yeah, it's done. This is it. This is where this map is the be-all and end-all. That ain't it. It's a place to start. If you want to kill it, kill it. If you want to kill it, you can say it's too much, or you can say it's not enough. This is a start. We have people who have worked very hard on this. We have a community that is ready for this. We have a city and a lot of people who are reticent about it. I support the strategy as it is before us. We have a strategy before us that is a great place to start. As Alderman Farrell said in her opening, is it perfect? Hell no, it's not perfect. Is it a great place to start? Yes, it is. Does it get us somewhere? Yes, it does. The motion that is before us inherently includes the referral to the budget. We are going to have the fight about money in November, and we're going to have it about this, and we're going to have it about a whole bunch of other things. If we refer the strategy back without passing it, administration has nothing to start from as a way to come for us. If my suggestion, Council, is that we don't have money on the table today. We do not have money on the table today. We have a strategy that fits with all of the direction that we have said we want to go. My suggestion to all of us is, you know what? Let's pass the strategy. It fits with, as I said, it fits with everything. Let's say yes to the strategy. Let's send the thing to administration, as the recommendation says, to come back to talk about money. And in November, if we don't want to give it $4 million a year, we want to give it $3 million a year, we can do that. Then they got to go out and figure out how you spend $3 million a year. If we want to give it $0 million a year, we can do that in November. We can spend all day here trying to figure out the amendments, send this map back, send this table back, change this line, change that line. It doesn't get us anywhere. Let's pass a strategy. Let's talk about the money in November, where we should, and maybe get out of here before midnight.
Thanks, Alderman Pincott. I should point out, I don't think I heard anyone say throw it out or send the whole thing back. And it is council's job to ensure that what we pass makes sense. But I certainly recognize the passion and the amount of work that's gone into all of this as well. And today we got to make a decision, in my opinion. Alderman Stevenson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have one short question. The bike share, is there a difference in the cities? Some cities have a bike mandatory helmet bylaw and others don't. Is there a difference in how effective the bike share program is? Do you know?
Through Your Worship, we know that there is. Well, first of all, the law here is 18 and under. You require a helmet. Above, you don't require a helmet. We would strongly urge that people use a helmet, but they wouldn't be required to if they're 18 and older. There is some experience in Australia when they introduced mandatory helmets across the board that the cycling went down. And so under our current laws, that's not the case. But if it was made mandatory, there is evidence that the number of people cycling would go down.
Yeah. I would think that if a person just thinks, okay, I'll jump on one of the bikes now, they don't have the helmet with them, then they wouldn't likely do it, right? So, and that's what we're trying to do with the bike share, is get people to just say, okay, I got to go there, I'll take one of the bikes, right? So, okay, thank you. I just wondered. Thank you.
It's just interesting, Alderman Stevenson, because that was probably the number one question I had when I was experiencing the Bixby programs. None of these people are wearing helmets because they don't have them. And I just never knew how I felt about that. Alderman Zwong.
Contrary to what was just mentioned, I do believe there is money on the table. We're talking about a $10 million existing funding, are we not? Through existing funding programs?
There is
actions funded by existing programs?
Yes, there is some existing programs.
Is it possible to describe to us which actions are being funded by existing programs?
Yes, primarily some of the on-street bikeways, some downtown, a few downtown, some in activity centers. There's some contribution to commuter pathways. So those are some of the things that the existing program funds.
Okay. Out of in this document.
Yes.
Some of these downtown pathways we're going to be putting lines on with the existing funding.
Yes, but only probably one or two. Because there's other demands on that same money outside of Center City.
Okay. Okay. Such as what?
Well, those commuter pathways, missing links, could be.
Okay. No. I mean, I'm sorry. My apologies. So yes, I'm sorry. I wasn't referring to the map so much as the diagram or the graphs, table 9.2 depicting what funds you're spending it on, and that's coming out of the 12.6 million a year, roughly, that your department is described as in the 2009 to 2018 transportation funding. Is that correct?
I believe that's
It's about
correct.
126 million over 2009 to 2018.
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Okay. Considering that we are looking at a 12.6 million per year, I realize that's an average. Can you tell me what other pedestrian and cycle activities we're doing with that funding?
Are you referring to our current or proposed? Sorry, just for
I'm sorry, I'm
clarification.
referring to on page 20 infrastructure funding to 4% of transportation infrastructure funding for the 10-year period 2009 to 2018 was dedicated for pedestrian and bicycle projects. Now, I'm assuming that this 10 million is coming out of that portion of it.
Yes, existing programs. Some of that money is going to pedestrian overpasses as well. So, and that accounts for a significant amount.
Okay, okay. Just on that same page, I was rather confused when you mentioned to his worship that we don't have any dedicated people yet on this page. It says Transportation Department staff levels dedicated to pedestrian and bicycle policy planning, design, and construction management have increased since 1999. So,
To that, Your Worship, I was the one who was the manager of transportation planning at the time. We did add positions in the solutions group, which is what we call it at the time, the area that Ms. Jensen works in, and we did add a couple of positions that included active modes. So cycling would be part of their primary responsibilities, and we also have summer students. And so I think that there are staff that have been specifically hired to look at active modes, but there's no one that's been hired to look at only cycling, if that provides any.
It does, thank you. And again, I kind of want to jump back to what His Worship was commenting on the design, on the $250,000 for the new bicycle design guides. I've been going through the NACTO Urban Bikeway Design Guide, and I'm just quite confused as to what we would be needing to actually add on for $250,000 to do it onto the city bike lanes. As far as a guideline, I can understand that you'd use your full-time person, one of these full-time FTEs for specifically finding out where and how you're going to put it on the specific Calgary streets. But for actual guidelines and design guides, I'm not sure what we would do uniquely to Calgary.
Through your worship, there's many more design details beyond what's in your single sheet there. There's things like bike boxes and colored lanes and transitions and bike signals and on and on and on. There's many components to a properly designed bicycle-friendly city, which is what we're shooting for. And so it's much more than what you see there in terms of the scope of it. And typically we develop guidelines that are signed by our engineers that acknowledge that this works in the Calgary context. And so it's all those different components that would be part of what needs to get done.
Okay. And this may be a question for Max or Mr. Logan. My apologies. Specifically, when you refer to the less actions funded by existing programs, that is over the next 3-year period, the 2012 to 2014, correct?
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay. So if we were to be looking at, have we determined what the 3-year period after that, ending in the 2018, what will be funding? Sorry, my wording's not coming to me properly.
As part of the previous TIIP, there were capital funds allocated in programs for things such as commuter cycling. So there is a stream of money running through 2018. Council has not approved those budgets necessarily, but they are in our strategic capital plan.
Okay. And they would be going towards things that are not listed on this table? Or future items that you're hoping to add to this future table at some point?
Your Worship, I would suggest that they would be similar in nature to, under Pillar 1, implementing immediate and short-term on-street bikeway improvements. They would be similar in nature to that. We had monies, when we did the plan several years ago, we were talking about things such as a network of pathways and missing links that would support cycling as a commuter mode. And so that was the thought. And coming out of that, there was additional work put into developing the cycling network, which was part of the CTP. And now this is sort of the next iteration of it. Now we're getting down to the details. But that plan is 4 to 6 years out, so we have time to identify the specific locations.
Okay. Is there any intent? I have heard from several citizens and a couple of organizations that they didn't feel completely or totally involved in this strategy as much as they had hoped to be. Would there be a potential in the future to be involved on the ongoing basis, or?
Absolutely, through your worship. This new bikeway and pathway plan we talked about earlier is absolutely driven by stakeholders, and it would be their opportunity to have significant input into the plan, which would then feed into that next 3-year business cycle that you were talking about.
Okay. Well, that's what I was hoping for. What would that look like? Would you be holding new, annual
We would have a whole series of workshops, open houses. It would be geographic. We would likely go to different parts of the city. We did this 10 years ago, and so we're quite familiar with what was done then. There's different ways of engaging now, but we see it throughout the city. It is citywide, and there would be multiple opportunities and multiple ways to be involved.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
No amendments now, Alderman Devon? Okay. Alderman Keating.
Thank you, Worship. I do want to go back to Alderman Pincott's comments, and I think he's exactly right. The strategy is solid. Let's move forward. Let's get it done as it is. If we start amending it in such a way that we're going to be down here for an awful long time, and as it is, says that the city shall not fund the bike program, because there are other cities who have lost thousands of dollars per bike share, thousands of dollars per bike to supplement this. And I don't think that's something we should be talking about here, but we should be talking about in November. And I think that's where we're getting bogged down is it's there. It was amended during a hearing where we had for hours on it. And I think it should move forward if it's going to move forward on that basis. I did have one question, and I asked it many times at committee, and I didn't really get an answer for it, but I think it's coming out a bit here. There's $12.8 million unfunded. And my question then, many, many times, is do we need any of that money sort of starting today? Or can the previous budgets cover what the expenses would be for the first part of the strategy, and then the unfunded part could come at the end of the strategy so that we could do best practices, efficiencies, and maybe find that $12 million without adding another item to the budget?
Mr. Mulligan, Mr. Logan, who wants to take that one?
For the most part, we could use those funds, although we have to be careful because those programs are annual funds, and we can't bring the funds back from year 2 and 3 to year 1 necessarily. So we can do some of what you're talking about, but not totally.
So this is really the key point, if I may, Alderman Keating. There's 10 million odd funded, but that's not in 2011, correct? That 10 million is planned for X number of years?
12, 13, 14.
So that's really the answer I think you're looking for, Alderman Keating.
And
call it a third for 12, 13, and 14. So in reality, we funded a bit of it over, well, we haven't done anything yet because we haven't passed the capital budget for the next 3 years. But the current capital budget anticipates that 1/3 of it happens each year. So bringing it all forward to the first year and not funding the second and third is actually the same net impact, if that makes sense.
Well, it does, and I was looking kind of, if you look at percentages, can we use some of that for, say, 75% of the first year's expenses, and then you can distribute it differently throughout the 3 years so that there is the possibility come budget time and come efficiency time, because we should be looking over the 3-year budget as well, that we may be able to find that $12 million in budgets existing already.
This is very helpful, actually, I think, Alderman Keating, because what it implies in the real world of budgets is there stuff in year 1 in the TIPS budget, non-cycling stuff, that we could move forward for a bigger investment of the money we already have in year 1 and a lower one of the money that's already been identified in 2 and 3 should other money come available? I mean, that's a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer it now, but it's an interesting direction, I think, as we move forward.
And I did want to bring these up because that's why it was so crucial that we go down to as it is. I remember reading Montreal, their Auditor General states that they are losing $1.3 million in interest on a loan for the bike share program. And we have some more information here on the Baltimore Brew. City puts the brakes on the bike share program because of costs. And that's why it's so crucial that we make sure, as you said, the business case is there, but we don't commit city funds to it up front. We look at it and we find private partners. And here's one from Washington, D.C. that talks about their losses in bike share programs. And we have to make sure that we look at all of these before we put city funds to them. Thank you.
I don't disagree. Thanks, Alderman Keating. Alderman McLeod, you ready?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to amend 1B first, and then I'll come back to 1A and 4. So, the new and improved 1B, direct administration to prepare a business case analysis of bike share reflecting potential sources of revenue, including private sector partnerships and sponsorships, costs, financial and non-financial benefits and experiences in other cities, and to report to the SPC no later than 2011 December. Does that cover just about everything?
So in effect, just to be clear, what that does is doesn't go quite as far as what Alderman Keating was saying.
Correct.
But it does mean before this comes back to council, we need to know whether there are those sources or not.
Yeah, so it doesn't say that there will never be city money put into bike share, period. It does not say that, because my opinion is that precludes the outcome of the business case,
You'd rather see the business case first.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and then we need to look at that.
Actually makes sense to me. Okay. And then the other two, you've just changed the language around a little bit.
Well,
a little bit.
Yeah, I completely reworded them, but it's essentially the same thing. I just tidied up the wording.
Okay. And thanks, Alderman Collier-Cart, for your very, very helpful
I was just gonna
input on that one.
Thanks.
Okay.
And both of them.
All right. Now, and I will call them separately, by the way.
Yeah. So 1A is up there and 4 is up there as well. So.
Okay. Great. Do I have a seconder for those? Alderman Keating? No, I was like, Alderman Keating. Alderman Putman, are you going to second that again?
No.
Okay. Alderman Collier-Cart. Thank you. All right. On the amendment then, Alderman Keating.
And again, as I stated and as we stated before, I appreciate, and I think this should have been in there in the first place, that we do a business case on the whole analysis, and is it going to work? The difficulty is it goes ahead, it says, this is our strategy, and it can be approved without council permission. I would be acceptable to this, or it would be acceptable to me, if there was another line added that simply stated no city funds would go into a bike share until approved by council at a later date, where it states...
I think, Alderman Keating, that's automatic, because I think that's what Mr. Tolbert just said. Let's ask Mr. Tolbert.
Okay.
Your Worship, this is simple direction for the administration to prepare a report.
Yep.
It's not implementing a program. It says prepare a report and come back to council. Council can say reject the report or accept it.
So in other words, no money can be spent until that report comes to council, correct?
And council approves this money.
And council approves it. Okay, that's what I thought.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman Keating. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, it helps because, yes, I know it's coming back. Unfortunately, it doesn't state that.
Yeah.
And that's the difficulty.
Yeah,
sometimes
so,
we have to state it to make sure that that's the implementation in the future.
So what we'll have to do, just to be very careful, although I know administration would never do this, is when you read it in combination with 1 and 4, right, it means that nothing's getting spent until it comes to the budget anyway. So we have to be vigilant, if you will, to make sure that the money's not there in the absence of the report. And it wouldn't be anyway. Administration would never do that. But you know, that's yet another belts and braces, as Alderman Marr would say.
And I do like belts and braces, and unfortunately, because it changes the original, I can't support it on that basis, because it goes against from what the previous hearing was.
Very
Thank
well.
you.
Thanks, Alderman Keating. Anyone else on the amendment? On the amendment, Alderman Chabot, then Carra.
I haven't spoken to the main motion, and it appears as though this is essentially replacing the original motion. So I guess I'll speak to this and, in essence, speak to both. And I do have a couple of questions for Mr. Mulligan. Through this process of engagement, just wondering how much engagement has there been with, say, bicycle manufacturers specifically?
I don't believe there's been any engagement with bicycle manufacturers.
And have we done any kind of engagement with, say, national distributors or retailers?
Not to my knowledge. No.
And that's part of the challenge that I see here, and insofar as trying to engage everyone that has a vested interest in this. What about organizations that organize specific functions like world-class type cycling events? Has there been much engagement on that front?
Well, as part of the whole process, there was a committee struck with representatives from a whole variety of backgrounds and different age groups, et cetera. Whether some of those had that background or not, I can't tell you.
And just so I'm trying to make a point here that although we've tried to engage everyone, we certainly haven't been able to engage everyone, and not everyone has been able to find the time to get engaged through the process that we've followed so far. And insofar as who we heard at committee, we certainly heard from a lot of individuals that were part of groups. We didn't hear so much from individuals per se because it was in the middle of the day. Most people were working. And so far as distributors are concerned, they're also working as well. This is their peak season. This is not the time of year when they really have a lot of time that they can actually get engaged in these kind of processes, because you would be costing them business, and time is money, and you try and make hay when the sun is shining, so to speak, and the sun is literally shining. So I voted against recommendation 1 and recommendation 4, and I see that now it's being directed without a specific number, although there is a number associated in the report. And part of my challenge with accepting what's being proposed here is that I didn't see enough, it wasn't demonstrated well enough to me as to how efficiently and effectively the money that we already had allocated in the budget was expended. I don't know exactly how many missing links were created through the money that had previously been allocated, how many new pathways have been created, how much on-street cycling, how much we've increased the capacity from a commuter cyclist perspective. So it's hard for me to say, yes, let's put a whole bunch more money at something, when I don't even know how the money that we've already put in there was spent. So how is this going to make things that much better versus what it was before? Which is why I would like to debate it further during budget time. So I'll support this. Not that I necessarily support the money that's there, because I will argue that point when it goes back to council. And I'm hoping that between now and when it gets back to council, that administration will undertake an exercise to better inform me and maybe other members of council, if they're interested, in how this money was spent.
Yeah, and one thing that I always encourage members of council to do is, when we get to budget, to be realistic, when we get to budget, boy, there's a lot of numbers in front of us.
Yep.
And so one thing I really encourage members of council to do is, on issues that they are particularly interested in, to really engage with administration prior to those days in November, to understand what's coming, and to get some of those questions answered. I know I certainly will on the areas that I'm interested in, and I really encourage others to do the same.
Yeah. Well, I'm really interested in numbers, Your Worship, so I expect that I'll be spending a lot of time engaging with a multitude of different departments to try and assess exactly what these numbers represent and what the intent is. I'm not overly supportive of the idea of putting in a program that potentially could compete with some of the local organizations and their functions, specifically on some of these world-class events, as I mentioned before. And I certainly would like to see us undertake, I don't know what the process is, but some alternate process to try and engage more people, more individuals, more actual commuters that were probably at work when we undertook many of these kind of engagement processes. So anyways, just my suggestions at this point, Your Worship, and I'll sit down. And I actually may vote against the recommendation just because it is tied to a specific number. But of course, like I said, I'll do my due diligence and assess it as best I can at budget deliberation time. And I did have one question, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
On the timeline associated with B. It says by 2011 December. And if we're going to discuss this in relations to the budget, should that date not precede budget deliberations as opposed to being after budget deliberations?
Mr. Logan?
Just a question.
It is a good question.
Your Worship, if it's revenue neutral, it wouldn't matter. That was why we weren't concerned about the date.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. On the amendment, Alderman Footmans? Okay. On the amendment, Alderman Carra?
Yeah, I'm just going to say I appreciate Alderman McLeod taking the time to sort of firm up. I think this actually gets towards the intentions of what we were talking about in committee a little bit better. I hear what Alderman Keating's saying, but I don't think that the amendment that was passed at committee precluded city dollars going into a bike share program either. It just said we had to work with a private sector partner, and this creates a business case, which is, I think, the most important thing we can do to inform council's decision. So yeah, I'll be definitely supporting it. And again, thanks to Alderman McLeod for putting it forward.
Point of privilege?
Yes, Alderman Keating?
Thank you. Seeing as I was referenced, and it did talk about committee, the idea of, say, the Calgary Parking Authority funding the bike share was brought up at committee, and it was dismissed. And it was said that no city funds should go into this program. So it does preclude the fact that any city funds should go into this bike share program.
Yep.
And I think that just needed to clarify that. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman Keating. I think Alderman Carra's point was that the wording that came out didn't actually say that, for one reason or another.
And that may have been a mistake either at the time or it has changed since then, but the intent was certainly discussed. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman Keating. Mm. Okay. Anyone else on the amendment? Alderman McLeod, did you want to close?
Just to add that this is really important if we are going to go out for a private sector partnership or if we're going to look for sponsorships to have a healthy, solid business case to go forward with that notion.
Thanks, Alderman McLeod. On the we're going to call them separately. So on 1A on the amendment, are we agreed? Any opposed? Alderman Chabot is opposed. On 1B, are we agreed? Any opposed? Alderman Keating is opposed. On 4, are we agreed? Any opposed? Alderman Chabot is opposed. Okay, so we now have the motion as amended. Back to the main motion, Alderman Putmans.
Thank you, Worship. Proposed Part 6, amendment to the resolution. City Clerks, I believe, has the words. Essentially, that costs associated with the actions of the cycling strategy and pathway safety review and capital costs be budgeted over a 4-year period. Very blunt and simple. I'm sure it could be more elegant, but I think the intent is clear. I believe that I'll wait for that for close. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
I need a seconder.
Oh, seconder, please.
So I have a seconder to get it on the floor. Thanks, Alderman McLeod.
Thank you.
So to get it on the floor so that we can actually have a quick debate about it. And in fact, I do want to ask Mr. Logan and Mr. Mulligan about this. What do you think? I mean, it was interesting for me to hear, Mr. Mulligan, that you said 3 years to align with our internal processes. And I appreciate that. But I also have a bias towards not doing stuff for internal reasons, but doing it because, it makes sense in the community. So what would this do to you if we moved it to 4 years?
Well, we'd simply stretch it out. We'd get less done. It's that obvious, I guess.
But and Alderman Putman's just nod if I'm saying this correctly. Your intent is to take the existing amount of money that was put in for 3 years and stretch it out over 4, not add a 4th year. Okay. You're stretching it out. I hear you. So, Mr. Mulligan, Mr. Logan, is that the only impact, that it would just stretch it out, or do you think any costs would change or increase? Like, are there any economies of scale of doing it in fewer years or anything like that?
Your Worship, if I might just answer that, we would have a couple of things. As Mr. Mulligan mentioned earlier, if we were to be able to bring forward a viable bike share program, then the bike lanes need to go with it. So there might be an impact there, although I don't have the specific numbers, so that would be one potential. The other thing would be, there's always construction cost inflation, so our money wouldn't go as farther in the 4th year. That being said, as with many of our plans, this is aspirational. This is what we think we could do given the funding. So we're always cognizant that there's a lot of asks.
On the amendment, Alderman Carra? Alderman Pincott on the amendment?
I'm not going to support this. Again, back to something I said previously, budget is something we talk about in November. If the intent to stretch it out over 4 years is because you want to stretch $12 million over 4 years, then I think staying within our budget planning process and not getting it out of sync for the next one, then I suggest that we, rather than fund it at $4 million a year for the 3 years, we fund it at $3 million a year. We accomplish exactly the same thing, but we keep it within the sync. And then administration will do exactly the same thing, but it doesn't throw it out of sync. By, again, here we're getting one step ahead of the budgeting process, and that certainly is not the intent of the report and the motion that's before us, which is to refer all of the funding and the budgeting to the budget, and not here. So I won't support it.
Thanks, Alderman Pincott. On the amendment, Alderman Farrell?
What Alderman Pincott said.
Oh, I like that. On the amendment, Alderman Keating? No? Okay. On the amendment, did you want to close, Alderman Putmans?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I guess I perhaps could ask administration, maybe there's a misunderstanding as to what we're doing with the original motion. In fact, it's pretty clear, as Alderman Demong also observed, there's a full column on page 4 of 5 outlining capital costs, capital funding, capital shortfalls, annual operating costs. This is complete with full-on costing. I appreciate this is going to a budget process, but I think it's going to a budget process with an implied budget. And I'm suggesting that budget should be stretched over 4 years instead of 3 years. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thanks, Alderman Putmans. On the amendment, then, are we agreed? Any opposed? Call the roll, please.
On the amendment, Alderman Keating.
Yes.
Alderman Lowe? No. Alderman McLeod?
No.
Alderman Pincott?
No.
Alderman Putmans?
We're in the middle of the roll, and you're voting.
Alderman Putmans?
Yes, he said.
Alderman Stevenson?
No.
Alderman Carra?
No.
Alderman Chabot?
No.
Alderman Colliercourt?
No.
Alderman Demong?
Yes.
Alderman Farrell? No. Alderman Hodges?
No.
Mayor Nenshi?
No.
It's lost.
Back to the main motion, Alderman Carra. Okay. Main motion, Alderman. Oh, I'm afraid you're going to close because you moved it. Main motion, Alderman Keating.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do remember back in committee where we had a lengthy discussion. We asked a lot of questions. We asked some fairly difficult questions, and I had some dialogue with the bike enthusiasts as well because of those questions. Unfortunately, I cannot endorse a strategy that has the potential to lose thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars because of one aspect in there. And not being able to remove that aspect, unfortunately, I cannot support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Keating. Alderman Chabot.
Just on a point of order, point of procedure, actually, so we can be clear on what it is that we're voting, because I know that we made some amendments and we consolidated some things together, and I'd like to see what it is that we're voting on, and if possible, if you could call them separately, because there's some.
Yes, I'd be happy to call them separately, and I believe the only amendments were to 1A and B and 4. Okay, so 2, 3, 5 are as they're currently written. So 1 and 4 have been amended, and we'll get those back up on the screen. Okay. Yeah, and I'll call all 6 of them.
Your Worship, if you could call 1 and 4 first and together, because if they go, I'm happy. If they don't, then I want to do the referral.
Can you do a referral while we're in the middle of voting? Okay. You know, 8 months in, and I still get new procedural things at every meeting. Okay, Alderman Farrell, to close.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank all the cyclists and non-cyclists alike who are interested in cycling, who participated in this strategy. And I wanted to thank Nicole and Dawn and the city staff who are cyclists themselves who worked on the strategy. I think it's a really important day for the city of Calgary. It reminds me a little bit of the recycling discussion that we had over and over again, and we approached it with a certain amount of reluctance and trepidation because we hadn't gone down that road before, but in hindsight it was the right way to go, and Calgarians love that service, and it's progressive, and that's what we're doing here, is we're helping to build a progressive city. And even if you don't cycle, you benefit, because those people who have the will and the interest to get on a bike and not take that trip, that one trip, create extra space for the motorists. And it's creating a healthier city as well. I believe that there's a tremendous amount of pent-up demand. And we heard that from the Calgarians who presented at committee. And I have to say, those Calgarians who were cyclists, most of them are not part of a group. They're cyclists who want better facilities so they can cycle in a safer way. So in celebration of this new strategy, I got a bike for my birthday. And my husband just went and bought a new basket for it today. And he just tweeted it to me. So I'm planning on celebrating by getting on my new bike. Thank you.
Some of us may or may not join you. So I'm going to take them all separately. If we could please have them up on the screen. If you got them. Okay, there we go. On 1A then. On 1A as amended, are we agreed? Any opposed? Alderman's have to call the roll, please.
On recommendation 1A as amended, Alderman Farrell. Yes. Alderman Hodges? No. Alderman Jones?
Yes.
Alderman Keating?
No.
Alderman Lowe? Yes. Alderman McLeod?
Yes.
Alderman Pincott?
Yes.
Alderman Putmans? Yes. Alderman Stevenson?
Yes.
Alderman Carra?
Yes.
Alderman Chabot?
No.
Alderman Colley-Urquhart?
Yes.
Alderman Demong?
No.
Mayor Nenshi?
Yes.
It's carried.
On 1B, are we agreed? As amended. Are we agreed? Any opposed? Alderman Keating is opposed. On number 4, Yeah. But I'm doing number 4 first, as per Alderman Lowe's request. On number 4, are we agreed? Any opposed? Alderman Chabot and Keating are opposed. On 2, are we agreed? Any opposed? Alderman Chabot and Keating are opposed. On 3, are we agreed? Oh, and Demong, sorry, on 2? Okay, call the roll, please, on 2.
On recommendation 2, Alderman Putmans? Alderman Stevenson?
Yes.
Alderman Carra?
Yes.
Alderman Chabot?
No.
Alderman Colley-Urquhart?
Yes.
Alderman Demong?
No.
Alderman Farrell?
Yes.
Alderman Hodges?
Yes.
Alderman Jones?
Yes.
Alderman Keating?
No.
Alderman Lowe? Yes. Alderman McLeod?
Yes.
Alderman Pincott?
Yes.
Mayor Nenshi?
Yes.
It's carried.
Thank you. That was 2. On 3, are we agreed? Any opposed? Alderman Keating is opposed. And on 5, are we agreed? Any opposed? Alderman Keating is opposed. All right, so those are all carried. Alderman Carra. Rising.
Thank you, Your Worship. My motion arising, if you could put that on the screen, it says, while broadly supportive of the cycling strategy, Council refers Appendix A back to administration to determine through engagement with the cycle community an updated and east-west, north-south separated cycle route network through the center city.
Oh, you stuck in that word separated, didn't you? I think we can still take it. Okay. Do I have a seconder for that one?
Second.
Thanks, Alderman Chabot. On the motion arising, Alderman Hodges?
Yes, it's an interesting motion. Your Worship, I tried to travel through the Beltline the other day, and I found 13th Avenue Southwest torn up from almost one end to the other. So the question is, which was always part of that center city plan, the question is there going to be any kind of bike access on this new 13th Avenue Southwest, which is being rebuilt? Can someone tell me? Maybe. Mr. Mulligan, sorry.
Yes, through Your Worship, absolutely. There's the east portion is under construction now, and there's plans for it's not actually on street. It's
I found that out.
And the balance of it is still to be determined. The west end is still to be determined. If it's ripped up, it's not for cycling infrastructure purposes.
So 13th Avenue, roughly, I was at First Street Southwest. To how far west is it going at the present time, Mr. Mulligan? So it was at First Street.
It's first to fourth.
First to fourth, all right. And the next stage would be fourth further west on 13th Avenue.
Yes.
So the question is, of course, could that be the east-west route that Alderman Carra is referring to? Are you thinking of something north of the railway line?
Yeah, I think it needs to be north of the railway.
Not 13th Avenue. Okay.
Thanks, Alderman Hodges. Anyone else? Alderman Lowe, then Pincott.
Difficulty I have, Your Worship, is I have no difficulty with consulting to update the penetrators and the routes through. It's that word separated. Then that kills it for me. So I won't support it. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman Lowe. Alderman Pincott?
Yeah, so there's no date on this, so I assume this is just as we move forward, identifying places where we could put separated routes. And this is, I guess, a question for administration on this. Through your work, did you get to a point in the strategy where you had specifically identified where in the center city separated bike lanes could be, or is that further work that you were anticipating anyway?
I'd have to say, through Your Worship, that we started down that road, so to speak, and we identified a few potential roads, such as 7th Street and Barclay Mall, right. But it's very preliminary. We haven't got to landing on specific routes for a separated bikeway.
This motion, should the strategy that we have just passed, and by the way, thank you and congratulations, everybody. This work, would it automatically, should we in November fund it, be part of your ongoing work anyway? You talked about ongoing consultation when we were talking about the strategy. So would this form part of your work at that point?
It could be part of the work. The word separated does lead us in a particular direction that we may or may not have gone. We don't know at this stage. It's possible this could be incorporated into that citywide pathway and bikeway plan where we are going to engage a large part of Calgarians in any event.
Right.
So there's a possibility there.
Your Worship, I would like to add an amendment to this, if I may, at this point. And it will be at the very end, and it will be at the end, just to go comma, as part of the implementation plan. for the bike strategy.
Point of procedure, Mr. Chair. I don't think we can refer something we've already passed. So I think that it could be.
I was told that's what we should do.
I think it's the word refer. I think you could review. Yeah.
That council direct administration to review Appendix A of Attachment 7 through engagement with the cycle community and determine. Yeah.
And that would be. So.
No, thanks, Alderman Farrell. Actually, it's I should have caught it when he put it.
So
I feel like we've been at this for.
So
15 years.
my amendment will stand as part of that. So that's the amendment I would like to place on this to ensure that we are doing this as part of the ongoing strategy work.
Okay, thanks. Let me just fix the main motion and then just stay standing for a second, and I'll get a seconder for your amendment. Direct the administration to review Appendix A of Attachment 7 to... Oh, you already got it. Okay. Yeah, I think that's fine. Okay, so we'll just take that one as an editorial change. And then do I have a seconder for Alderman Pincot's amendment? Thanks, Alderman Farrell.
Great.
All right.
Yeah.
So anyone on the amendment to the amendment, just wave at me. It's not amendment to amendment, excuse me, the amendment to the motion arising. Yeah. Just wave if you want it. Otherwise, okay. On the amendment, then, are we agreed? Any opposed? Alderman Keating is opposed. Back to the motion arising, I have Alderman Keating.
I think this goes back to many comments, at least 45 minutes, if not. We should have passed it and moved on, and we wouldn't be still sitting here talking about it. So unfortunately, I can't support it because it doesn't include the cost-cutting effects. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman Keating. Alderman Farrell on the motion arising? Okay. Alderman Chabot on the motion arising.
Yeah, very briefly, Your Worship, I'm supporting this motion arising because some people in the cycling community felt that the map was top-down driven as opposed to considering all of the input from individual cyclists, and they felt that the map actually predated the public engagement process, and as such there was limited opportunity for the public to participate in the process of maybe helping to guide the direction as to where some of these cycling routes should be. And so I'm supportive of this recommendation. I think it looks at alternative commuter routes, east-west and north-south. So I'm supportive.
Sure, go ahead, Alderman Farrell.
Thank you. Based on that comment, I have a question for administration. Mr. Mulligan, what process did you go through in order to determine these routes? Did you go through any consultation to just pull them out of thin air?
They were based on the Center City plan.
But was there consultation with that?
There was consultation to some extent on that plan, yes.
Mm-hmm. So the idea of updating it and reviewing the assumptions is helpful, I would imagine.
Yeah, I don't think it's any harm. It may, in fact, help us.
And we do have a new piece, hopefully, by December, of cycling infrastructure that could link north-south. I'm not going to say it.
I know to which you
it's
refer.
Red.
I do know what.
All right.
Thanks, Alderman Farrell. Alderman Zamong on.
Simply because the topic came up. I've heard rumors that along said structure that cyclists are going to be required to walk their bikes through it. Is there any validity to this?
Absolutely not.
Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
The floor at the moment, but all right, enough. On the Alderman Carrata, close on.
All right, well, I just want to say I appreciated Alderman Pincot's impassioned plea to council that we have to pass a strategy, and I hope this is broadly supportive of the cycle strategy. I think we understand that we have broad direction as a city that we have to get more people cycling. And I think that what this is doing is it's suggesting that there is pent-up demand, and I fundamentally believe that if we're going to unleash that pent-up demand, we need to have an updated and comprehensive strategy. I mean, I look at this map, and I think it's a product of an earlier time. It's a product where we were weighing a lot of trade-offs, and I'm not sure that those trade-offs are really going to get us to where we want to go. And I'm not saying that we have to make that decision now, but we have broadly supported this cycle strategy. We understand it's the right thing to do for all kinds of triple bottom line reasons. It would be very nice to put on the ground, or I mean not on the ground, but on a piece of paper, what a comprehensive separated network could look like so we can have a real budget debate about that. And that's what I hope council will support, and this is what I hope administration will get, is that there is a willingness and an appetite to talk about the full spectrum, from the tentative baby steps into putting in cycle lanes to what a full meal deal might look like. And this is just in the center city. So I hope you'll support this, and thanks everyone. Closed.
Thanks, Alderman Carra. On the motion arising, are we agreed? As amended. Are we agreed? Any opposed? Call the roll, please.
On the motion arising as amended, Alderman Chabot,
Yes.
Alderman Demong,
Yes.
Alderman Farrell, Alderman Hodges,
Yes.
Alderman Jones, Alderman Keating,
No.
Alderman Lowe, Alderman McLeod,
Yes.
Alderman Pincott,
Yes.
Alderman Putmans,
No.
Alderman Stevenson, Alderman Carra,
Yes.
Mayor Nenshi.
Yes.
It's carried.
Thank you very much. All right, and let me also add my thanks to all of the Calgarians who participated in this process. And I won't say the cycling community, because the people who participated in this process, I think, were everyday Calgarians who are interested in looking at how we can transport people through the city more effectively. So thank you all, and now the real work starts. All right, so that takes us to